Welcome to episode 67 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tachek.
Have we ever talked about security features built into iOS? Yes, we did it last week. Our short look at new security features in iOS 11 ran a little long though, so we busted it into two segments, or two shows really. Last week, if you missed it, oh, you missed a good one. We had Face ID, better protection against unauthorized backups, and new physical safety features. I say you missed it, but it's a podcast. So that was episode 66. If you want to take a look at that. On this week, though, to episode 67, and that would be the built-in features to iOS or security features for iOS part 2. This week, we're covering better tracking prevention, improvements to photo privacy, and finally, there is a questionable change to Control Center in iOS 11 that Nicholas, and I would like to hit. Before we get to that, though, let's talk about some of the good things that have happened in iOS 11. Hitting better tracking prevention to start us off.
Well, you've probably encountered this situation in the past. You search for something on Google or Amazon, and then ads for that thing seem to follow you around the internet for the next 3 weeks straight. It's not your imagination. You really are being followed around by those ads, and it's all thanks to tracking cookies. Now, we've discussed online tracking previously, all the way back in episode 16, but here's a brief refresher on tracking cookies. When you visit a website, cookies are placed on your computer. These cookies are used to keep track of things. The first time you visit a site, you might see a splash screen, for example. And they're also used to help keep track of the contents of your online shopping cart in case you accidentally close your browser window before checking out. And they're also used by advertisers. When you search for a product online, third-party advertisers will make use of tracking cookies to ensure that you'll see ads for that product on any website you visit that's in their ad network. And one way to solve the problem of tracking cookies is to block all cookies in your web browser. But the downside of that is that it's kind of a heavy-handed approach, and it will usually break more things than it fixes. So in iOS 11, Apple actually has a pretty great solution, and it's called Intelligent Tracking Prevention. The best part is you don't need to set anything up. It's already all enabled as soon as you install iOS 11. It's pretty neat. It actually uses the way that tracking cookies work as a way to prevent them from working. Kind of something out of a kung fu movie there, using an enemy's strength against them. But that's actually how it works. Since a tracking cookie needs to be stored on a third-party server in order to work correctly, and thus allow those ads to follow you around, Apple will separate first-party cookies, which are those that are coming from the actual website domain that you visited, and they separate them from the third-party cookies, which are hosted on different websites than the one you actually visited. And so those cookies can still be used in a third-party context for the first 24 hours. And that's to help, like, if you, some services need you to log in with one website to get into another website, like Audible requires you to log in with your Amazon login. So that would still work in those first 24 hours. But after a day, those same cookies can no longer be used in a third-party context. So immediate uses are things like logging into other websites from with one login from a different website. So that works just fine. When you're talking about something that goes more than 24 hours, that's usually tracking cookies. And so they won't work anymore after a day. And then they're purged completely after 30 days. And so the way it's set up will ensure that the cookies that are actually coming from the websites you visit are still working correctly. But those third-party tracking cookies pretty much become useless to advertisers. And you can kind of tell that Apple's doing the right thing there based on how up in arms the advertisers are. I mean, they're pissed off. They're real pissed off. They said, it's going to ruin the way the internet works and all that other stuff. And I guess Google did send out an email saying that they've figured out a workaround for Google Analytics, which is the way that they allow tracking cookies to work. Mm-hmm. And I mean, almost every website uses them in some regards because you use them to get your metrics on your website visitors. Knowing how many visitors you got to your site, knowing how long they stayed, all this other information. Google provides this if you sign up with their program. But it's also tracking cookies are also used by those advertisers for making sure that those ads follow you around, which people aren't exactly fond of.
Well, it's also just really lazy advertising. I mean, I don't mean to sound like a jerk, but like I find that I hate companies that, like, if I can't get away from them any place I go online, and I made the mistake of visiting their site. There was one in particular that I bought a fairly expensive set of clothing from. And so, like, their advertising had worked, right? Or my knowledge of them had worked. I had actually gone there. I had spent a decent amount of money. And then I kind of wanted to return everything that I had gotten by the time it got to my house, because everything that I did online, it was still showing me that place. Like, hey, do you know about this place? And I'm like, well, yeah, I just sent you $300. Yes, I know. Can I please have a unpestered move around the internet?
No, that's the kind of funny thing is when you actually, when the advertising worked and you do buy the product, and then you're still seeing the same ads for the same product. It's like, no, thanks, I already got that.
And
I'm good.
That's because it's misconfigured in a way. There are ways to configure it so when the person does buy the product, they're not going to see the advertisement for that product. Instead, they could sell you Apple Care for that product or something that you didn't buy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there's ways to configure it so it says, hey, wait, this guy did buy it. Let's not waste our money on him anymore because he already has the product.
So Ken's right that it's laziness on the part of the advertiser then, that they didn't configure it correctly?
It could be that it's not configured correctly. It could be that, they just think we just want our ad in front of the person. I mean, if it's not for that particular product that he was looking at and it's just for their business, then he's just trying to get them back again. And
sure.
I mean,
forgive me when I say it's laziness. I mean, that's being a bit flip. It's generally speaking what it was like, hey, do you know about this website? Or, hey, don't forget this website exists. And I'm like, well, how am I going to? I just spent however much money I just spent with you. I mean, I get, they know that I am somebody who is inclined to spend money with them because I just spent money with them. But the problem is I just spent money with them. And so it's not like I've forgotten. And also, probably if I was opening up my wallet, I was getting the stuff that I wanted at the time. And I'm talking about one specific site, but I mean, certainly it's the kind of thing that we've seen, Well, I visited a site that sells T-shirts the other day. I was looking at one specific T-shirt, and it's interesting because I did notice for the next day, I was seeing an ad for that T-shirt almost everywhere I went, but it was only for the next day. So I guess that is some of Apple's work at work.
And online advertisers aren't the only ones who are tracking users. iOS 11 actually has another feature to help put a stop to tracking users' physical location without their knowledge. Previously, when it came to apps requesting your GPS location, you could only choose to allow or disallow access. Some apps would specifically provide an option only when using, but that was kind of an opt-in as far as the developers went. They didn't have to offer that option. And some apps actually used to have that option. Uber used to have it, and then they took away the option. And in the past, some apps were caught gathering location data from users even when they weren't using the app. So Apple basically decided to crack down on that shady behavior and is now requiring that any app that wants access to your location data has to offer the only when using option if they want access to that data. So that gives a lot more control to the end users as far as what apps get access to the location data and when they get access to it. I mean, it makes sense if you're using your Maps app to get directions. It makes sense that you need your location data while you're getting those directions. Or one of the rideshare apps, it needs your location data to know where to send the car. But it really doesn't need that data when you're not using the app, because why? You're not using the app for its purpose, so why do they need to know where you are? And that's Apple definitely took that point of view and decided to make things better for the user in that regard.
And save your battery.
That is true.
Next item on the list, improvements to photo privacy. Now, this obviously isn't the kind of thing where iOS has gotten smart enough to erase your address if you're, I'll say it, dumb enough to take a picture of something that has your address on it and post it online. What kind of privacy things are we talking about here as far as what iOS is doing to protect us on the picture side?
Well, if you've ever used iOS before with photos, you've probably encountered at least one app that's requested permission to access your entire photo album. Generally, that's done so an app can either take and save photos to your camera roll, or so it can access your photos in order to edit them or post them to social media or do something else with them, send them to friends. And in the past, this was an all or nothing setting. There was no real way to provide fine-grained control as far as what an app could do with your photos once it had access to them. You basically just had to trust that your apps were behaving themselves and not, data mining your photos in the background or secretly sending them somewhere else without your knowledge or permission.
Before you go any further, when you say data mining your photos in the background, are you talking about things like location data, things like that? Or what kinds of things could people actually be data mining from your photos?
There was actually quite a bit of talk about this in recent months, and everything from metadata, like your location, to things like with machine learning and some of the photo analysis stuff that can be done now with machine learning algorithms, identifying everything from identifying people in a photo to identifying products or locations or whatever. All that information could technically be analyzed in the background. If some product, for example, wanted to know, hey, is there a can of this particular brand of soda in the picture? It could technically be done. A machine learning algorithm could be set up that could identify that. And some businesses, whatever edge they can get on in terms of market share, product metrics, whatever. So it's a possibility that kind of stuff could be done. And then I guess that one is maybe less of a, people might not care so much if they know what particular brand of soda is in your pictures, but people would definitely care more if an app was surreptitiously sending all of your photos off to a third-party server without your knowledge and consent. And that was technically possible because once you granted an app access to your photo album, you weren't, it was all or nothing. It had access to all of your photos. It wasn't necessarily just that one photo that you wanted to edit and post onto Facebook. It was, oh, hey, this app also has access to everything. And you just trusted what, the app was behaving itself. And so iOS 11 actually has a pretty good solution for that dilemma, whether or not to give an app access to your photos. I know personally, I've had it before where an app has requested access to my photos, and it was just like, I downloaded the app to see what it did or something like that, and I just didn't trust the app enough to grant it permission. And that, in some cases, just meant I couldn't use a feature of the app. In other cases, it's meant that an entire app is useless because users have to get to that level of trust. They have to say, oh, okay, you can have access to all of my photos in order to actually work. So there are new options in iOS 11, and these are specifically given to developers. So this is something that developers have to implement, but an app can now request write-only access, which is essentially saying, hey, we don't need to see your photos. We just want to be able to save a photo. So if I'm making a camera app, I want to be able to save those photos to the album. But I don't necessarily care about previous photos you've taken because I'm not doing anything with them. So that gives an app developer a way to kind of limit the capabilities of their own app, which would make users basically trust it more because it's not having access to any of the other stuff. And basically, Apple also, on the back end of things, on the code end of things, they made another change. And this is with regards to the way that apps access photos. And previously, as I said, you'd have to grant an app permission to access your entire photo library, even if you just wanted to post one picture of your cat on Instagram. In iOS 11, Apple has taken away that authorization step entirely. Now, when an app needs to interact with one of your photos or videos, you get to pick the photo or video, and it's actually iOS kind of inserting itself between you and the app. And so when you're picking that photo or video, your iOS is managing that data, and they'll actually take the data for that individual photo or video and provide just that individual piece of media to the app. The apps no longer get access to the entire photo library. So now it's essentially granting permission that the app can access just what you're telling it you want to access, rather than, carte blanche for your entire photo album. So that's a really awesome improvement for user privacy. And then there's another, photo type user privacy thing in iOS 11 which is with FaceTime. Now, when you're chatting with someone over FaceTime, you have the option of taking a FaceTime live photo to capture a moment from the call. And that only works if your chat partner has set their preferences in FaceTime to allow it. If you do take one of those live photos, both of you will receive a notification that the live photo was taken. So your chat partner will know that you essentially took a photo, and then it's saved to your photos library. And it's important to note that this doesn't prevent someone from simply taking a screenshot of the FaceTime call. That doesn't provide notification to the other person, but it's still a step in the right direction as far as keeping users informed when a photo of them is taken.
We've seen some of the privacy chat apps implement features like that too, yeah?
Yeah, I believe, is it Snapchat that'll say when you've taken a screenshot?
Yeah.
Forgive me.
So,
does Snapchat actually inform you that somebody has taken a screenshot, or does it inform you that somebody has tried to? Because I thought the whole point of Snapchat was all the stuff goes away. And that's why it was so horrifying when people figured out, oh, wow, somebody's actually taking screenshots here. I mean, I thought what they were trying to do was keep it from happening, not just saying, "Hey, that happened."
You might be right about that one. I haven't used the app in a while, so I can't say with high certainty there. But it is possible that the code is possible there that you can know when it's happened. So it's definitely something that if Apple doesn't already have the capability built in there, that they could add something like that, like, "Hey, somebody just took a screenshot of your chat."
Can I circle back really quickly to something you said earlier, because it's sort of playing in my head, and I'm wondering, see, I don't want to name an app because I don't want to say this happened with an app unless there's actually one that we know about. So if you know a real world example, please let me know. But it sounds like what you're telling me, if there was some photo sharing application where I was wanting to post that one picture of my cat, as you say, if I wanted to use that app, then that app would say, okay, we need access to your photos so that we can, post this picture of your cat. Do we know of an application that was actually going in and grabbing all of your photos anyway? I mean, were they scanning your photos for anything in particular? Were they actually taking all of your photos and then just showing what you said you wanted showed? Or is this like, hey, somebody could do that, so let's stop it before anybody does?
As far as I know, it was mostly theoretical discussion in the security circles. Okay. I want to say that I want to say that the conversation started because there might have been an incident, but it was not, as far as I can recall, it wasn't any sort of major, it wasn't one of the major apps, it wasn't like Instagram or anything like that. It was more that the possibility existed. I think, I want to say if it was happening over on Android. I don't think it was iOS. And so I'd have to go back and reread my my research notes on that. But as far as I recall, it was not a specific, like, this is happening, because that would have probably made a fair amount of news and they would have gotten kicked out of the App Store by Apple pretty quick. But it was more, from a security and privacy standpoint, the fact that that's how it used to work, that you had to grant full access. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous when you think about it. So it's really cool that Apple made that change.
And to clarify on that, that's within iOS 11, and you said it's something that developers have to opt into?
As far as I could tell, and it was a little confusing on that, I definitely know that the write-only access is an opt-in. Basically, in iOS 11, if you go to your settings and you go to the privacy section, there's a section on photos, and it will show you there what apps have access to your photo library. Now, some apps on my phone, Facebook, for example, are still showing read and write access to the photo library, and so I'm not certain with regards to the granting permission to your photos, if that was, like, since it was already before I upgraded to iOS 11, if it was already in place, if it remains in place or not. And as far as I could tell, Apple hadn't clarified that. The write-only access is developer opt-in, and it will then, instead of saying read or write, it would give you the option to say write-only, which basically means it can only save photos, it can't read them, it can't use them. As far as the way that apps access photos, individual photos or videos now in iOS 11, at WWDC, Apple, the Apple Developer Conference, Apple specifically said in one of the tracks on iOS development, they specifically said that the way it works now is apps no longer have direct access to your photo library. Instead, you are choosing what individual photo or video or whatever that the app has access to, and iOS itself will mediate access for the app to that individual media file. However, they didn't make it very clear there, at least in my reading of it, they didn't make it very clear if that was going forward, if it was new apps, if they hadn't already been granted permission, or if it was also for existing apps that you had previously granted permission to. So that would definitely be something that we'd have to look into more. If anybody listening has further information on that, we'd be happy to hear it. But as far as I can tell, at least going forward, that's going to be Apple's new stance, and that's the correct one as far as security and privacy goes. There's absolutely no reason to be granting access to all of your media just to be able to post a picture online.
Last item on today's checklist. We've been talking, actually, for the past 2 episodes, well, this episode and the one before, we've been talking about a lot of things that we really like that Apple has done with security in iOS, some changes they've made, or safety in iOS, let's say. There is one thing, though, and I know we brought it up on the show before, but it's worth revisiting. There's a change that they've made to Control Center in iOS 11, where basically, the off switch isn't quite as off as you might think. Talk to me about the changes in, it's changes in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, correct?
Yeah. Prior to iOS 11, you could easily turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth right from the Control Center. There was no need to open up the Settings app and drill down to the correct section. Now, in iOS 11, however, Apple changed things up. Now when you tap the Wi-Fi or Bluetooth icon in Control Center, it doesn't actually turn them off. Instead, it just temporarily disconnects your iOS device from a Wi-Fi network or Bluetooth device. In order to completely turn off Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, you need to go into the Settings app. You need to find the section for Wi-Fi or Bluetooth and then turn the settings off in those specific sections. The most likely reason for this change was for improved user experience. Control Center might have made it a bit too easy for people to disable Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, and when done by accident, it could certainly be a cause for confusion, especially for non-power users. Unfortunately, by changing the behavior of an existing feature with no meaningful way of notifying users of the change in behavior, Apple might be giving a false sense of security to users who think they've completely disabled Wi-Fi or Bluetooth from Control Center. So,
yeah, there is. Well, if I could interrupt you just for a second, I mean, there are changes coming. Who knows? By the time people hear this, iOS 11.2 may actually be out. And there are actually changes coming in iOS 11.2 that will sort of explain it a bit more to people, but they only sort of explain it a bit more to people. Like when you say it goes off for a short period of time, you're actually turning off Wi-Fi or Bluetooth until the next day. It'll be disconnected until tomorrow, is what the first time the message comes up says. But it stays on in the background for AirDrop, personal hotspot, and location accuracy, right? And same sorts of things for Bluetooth. Instead of jumping off a Wi-Fi network, it'll disconnect Bluetooth devices again until the next day. Even that doesn't really tell everything, though. And look, none of this is necessarily nefarious, but if you're somebody who, for whatever reason, has decided you want to turn Wi-Fi off, thinking that you've turned Wi-Fi off is kind of what you want to think. And even like turning off Wi-Fi, even if you're just like, okay, I just want to turn it off for today, for whatever reason, even that's not quite right, because obviously you can turn Wi-Fi back on using Control Center. Same thing with Bluetooth. You can reconnect to a Wi-Fi in settings. That's fine. If you go to a new location, and this is kind of the one that bothers me, like maybe you're on your way someplace and you're like, I don't want to be on their Wi-Fi network today for whatever reason, like Starbucks. You made the mistake a year ago, or you decided a year ago, or even last week, I'm going to go on the Wi-Fi network on Starbucks, right? And now you're on your way to Starbucks, and so you turn off Wi-Fi. You do that, of course, before you start the car and get rolling, because you've also turned on Do Not Disturb while driving. But you turn off Wi-Fi. The thing is, when you get to the next place where it recognizes a Wi-Fi network, it's going to go ahead and pop itself back on. So even though you've turned it off, you think you've turned it off until tomorrow. You know in the back of your mind, okay, I haven't actually turned it off because this off switch doesn't really turn it off anymore. But I have at least turned it off before I get to the next place. Getting to the next place is going to turn it back on because it's going to see, oh, trusted Wi-Fi network. And we're someplace that we weren't when we turned it off. So I'm going to go ahead and pop back on and hop online. So walking or driving to a new location will do that. And then it all turns back on at 5 o'clock the next day. Anyway, or if you reset your device, if you restart your iOS device, then it sort of assumes, oh, well, I don't even remember if he wanted it on or off before he turned me back on, or turned me off and turned me back on. So I'm going to go ahead and be on Wi-Fi, just the way I would be, as if the off button hadn't been pressed. Sorry, that's stuff that's coming up. So I mean, I know Apple now says, okay, we're clarifying a bit, but I don't really personally feel like they're clarifying. I feel like they're just, like throwing up words so you feel like you've been informed.
And I still think that the security industry as a whole was pretty much up in arms with that change. And I think the change definitely wasn't made for any of us who are security minded or privacy conscious. It's for non-power users. I've had tech support calls from my dad and my grandma because they were wondering, why isn't my iPhone working? And it's because they either managed to turn off Wi-Fi or turn on Do Not Disturb or whatever in Control Center by accident. It's pretty easy to get there, tapping the buttons by accident, especially if you don't know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Accidentally turning on airplane mode, stuff like that. And so the general consensus is that Apple did this because most users don't actually care about their security and privacy. They do care about their device working. Seriously.
Right.
Yeah, and this is going to work for the majority of the people. Yeah, why isn't AirDrop working? Oh, because you accidentally turned off Wi-Fi. Apple's trying to protect against that. And they're trying to do it for the majority of their users who would experience the device in that manner. So Unfortunately, security, as usual, takes a back seat to other user features. So this is definitely just something to keep in mind, especially if you're traveling with your iOS device running iOS 11. Just make sure you understand how it works, because we've stressed before the importance of disabling Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. When you're in a setting where potentially it could be malicious or untrusted networks. So
in Las Vegas for DEF CON,
yeah. Any of the security hacker conventions.
I say just don't go to those, because I don't know if you know, but those security people, nothing but trouble.
Oh, man. Don't give them a bad name. There's good people out there. Oh,
yes, there are. There are good people out there doing good work week after week after week. Speaking of which, week after week after week, we've been making shows, and we've been putting up show notes for every one of those shows. If you're getting questions from friends or family members who don't understand what a podcast is, but do understand, the whole WWWs, you should direct them to our site, SecureMac.com/checklist. That is the site for this show, SecureMac.com/checklist. Gosh, we've done shows on password do's and don'ts. We've done shows on security features for iOS devices now, of course, and security features for Macs as well. Just a ton of great information there that people can go back and peruse at their leisure. SecureMac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask us or a topic you would like to hear us hit, we have an email address as well. It is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.